Say that again, Rigo?
It said I was testing the mute button just to make sure that I know where it is.
Oh yeah, it's up there on the top right.
Yeah.
But we want to hear you the whole time, Rigo. Hi everyone, good afternoon. If you've just joined us, welcome to the UCLA Pritzker Center's COVID-19 Community Speaker Series. We're really delighted today to have Professor Nina Rabin from UCLA Law and Executive Director Rigo Reyes from the Office of LA County's Immigrant Affairs. This is a different Zoom format than you may be used to, so just please understand that all attendees are on mute. Our panelists, myself, Tyrone Howard, our director, Ruby Tucker, our program representative, and three of our students are also on the screen. And that will be the group that you see here, and then everyone else will be listening in via audio. So we still have a couple minutes before we officially start, so we'll continue to let people log in. And please know we're also streaming live on Facebook, and we have a Spanish call-in line with instructions in the chat in Spanish, should you wish to share them with someone who needs Spanish language. We'll go ahead and start in a few minutes. Thank you so much. All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Hi everyone, on behalf of the UCLA Pritzker Center, thank you so much for being here with us today. We want to acknowledge off the top of the call that we're finding ourselves in unique and challenging times, and that many of our families are facing circumstances that are unimaginable. And for that reason, we are so honored to have two preeminent experts on immigration and the issues impacting immigrant children and families joining us today for a discussion. We thank you so much for being here. And I'd like to go through a couple of logistics, and then I'll turn to introducing our esteemed speakers. First of all, we wanted to let you know that we are recording this talk. We're recording it for educational purposes so that the talk can be shared widely with people who are not able to be here with us live. So the talk will be recorded and shared within about 3 days on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and sent out via email. We are also live streaming this call on Facebook right now for those of you who prefer that as a platform. We're also offering this talk in Spanish, and I'd like to turn now to our student, Flor, who can share that information with all of you.
Buenas tardes a todos. Si necesita alguna asistencia en español, contamos con una llamada en vivo que traducimos toda la información de la videollamada. Las instrucciones están en el chat, solo llame al número que aparece ahí y ingrese el código que le piden. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Flor. Flor is going to turn now to the hotline where people are on that line in Spanish, and we thank her very much for doing that. We wanted to also go over a couple of logistics in terms of questions. We welcome our attendees to please submit your questions in the chat. We will do our best to answer those questions today during the call, but should we run out of time, we will follow up with your questions, hopefully via email and various resources that we also have. If you do have a question, please be sure to share your email address so that we can be sure to get back to you if we're not able to address it live. And finally, if you weren't able to RSVP, please feel free to leave your email address so that we have it and can share our resources with you after the call. With that being said, that concludes our logistics. I'd now like to introduce a few folks. We have 3 students joining us today, Brittany, Cheyenne, and Flor. They're assisting with logistics. We have our program representative, Ruby Tucker from the UCLA Pritzker Center, and our director, Dr. Tyrone Howard from UCLA. And I'd also, of course, like to introduce our amazing speakers, Professor Nina Rabin with UCLA Law, and Rigo Reyes with the LA County Office of Immigrant Affairs. That concludes our logistics. Turning now to our speakers. Nina and Rigo, please briefly introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background.
Great, I can start. Well, thank you so much for putting together this terrific series and inviting me to be included. I'm the director of the Immigrant Family Legal Clinic at the UCLA Law School. We are a unique partnership between LAUSD and the law school, as well as the Graduate School of Education. We're sited in the RFK Community Schools, so it's a large complex of public schools in Koreatown. And what I do is supervise law students who are providing legal services to the immigrant students and families that go to this school. There's about 4,000 students. And so I think that it gives me a helpful view of how some of the impacts we're going to discuss today are impacting people on, very much in the community on the ground, because we have a lot of open cases for the families that we serve in the school that I can tell you a little bit about. We also, I work with law students on other immigration cases too. We're actually representing a family that's currently trapped in Tijuana, one of many asylum seekers, so I can bring some of my practice experience from the border to the conversation as well. And I've done research and teach on the topic of immigration policy, and particularly its impact on women and children. So try to track how this is playing out beyond right here in LA.
Thank you so much, Nina. Rigo?
Thank you, Taylor, Tyrone, and all the students helping to make this possible. It is really incredible, the work you are doing, and timely. I mean, certainly our immigrant communities have been very concerned over the last few years in regard to immigration policies. And now with this health crisis, it's just bringing everything to a point. I just can't imagine what the immigrant families are going through in addition to dealing with the coronavirus situation. They're concerned that seeking help and getting out to look for services may impact their immigration status. So we want to make sure that we make it very clear. I'm, as the director of the Office of Immigrant Affairs in the Department of Consumer and Business Affairs, the county has a large variety of services available for all. And many of these services are not impacted by the person's immigration status. So we'll get into a little more detail about some of those issues, but primarily we want to reassure our immigrants and their families that the office of the purpose of the office really is to make sure that all our immigrants know about the services the county has and how they can access those services. And so we're talking the huge impact that this is having on everyone. We see tenants, we see workers, we see just all around everything we do every day, particularly again with immigrants that are not getting some of the benefits, those coming from the federal government specifically, where undocumented immigrants don't qualify. So our work every day is trying to figure out what we can bring to them in a way that is beneficial.
Thank you so much for your introductions. Let's start with our first question. Of course, COVID-19 is impacting individuals around the world. It's impacting communities, systems, agencies, universities. Everyone that we can think of is certainly impacted by COVID-19. But I'm wondering if both of you could speak to how COVID-19 is impacting immigrant families and immigrant children in unique and different ways from everyone else.
Sure. I think that I was going to run through like 4 major ways that I think that we're seeing. I mean, there are just a host of ways, and like in other areas, I think that what we're seeing is that it's really exacerbating a lot of pre-existing ways that the immigrant community has, been disenfranchised, marginalized, disempowered before this. But I was going to focus on ways that they're disproportionately impacted in the workplace, in access to healthcare, in mental health impacts, and then at the border, just really quickly, and then we can go into more depth on any of these. But in the workplace, I think that we see immigrant workers having kind of the worst of both worlds here, where on the one hand, they're disproportionately likely to be labeled essential workers, which are people who are really at the front lines and are doing some of the most hazardous work still out there and doing it despite the rest of workers being told to stay inside. So that would be farm workers, healthcare workers, delivery drivers. All of these industries are disproportionately high numbers of immigrant workers. And, one of the concerns is that they might not be getting adequate information about the hazards and how to stay safe in those occupations. So I think that's a real particular concern. And then on the flip side, you have a disproportionate number of immigrant workers in industries that are particularly hard hit and that are gonna be hit for a long time by this pandemic. So that would be, hospitality, travel, restaurants, childcare. These are heavily immigrant industries, and they're all looking at just massive job losses. And so, the immigrant community is already, really tends to be low income. And now with these major job losses and less of a social safety net to draw on, that's a huge concern. The other way that quickly, and we can get more into the immigrant workers, but the other way that you really see a disproportionate impact is in access to healthcare. They're far less likely to have healthcare to begin with. And then this is one of the many ways where the pandemic really exacerbates unfortunate and extremely problematic things the Trump administration was doing beforehand with immigration policy. So there's been a real concern that because of this public charge rule that's been kind of slowly rolled out over the course of the last year and just recently became formally implemented, there's been even less of a sense of safety for immigrants in accessing healthcare. And that comes at it couldn't be a worse time, because now you have communities that were already scared of seeking out care, and now we see the impact of that, which is, we really need people to be getting health care, and yet there's so many ways that the overwhelming message has been that it's a dangerous thing to do. What I mean by dangerous is that the public charge rule says that if you apply for certain types of benefits and health care, among them, it can be a bar to getting a green card down the road. Now, there's lots of complications that could be its own topic for a webinar, but that rule has had a huge chilling effect even before it was implemented in people getting health care or a host of other services, even ones that they are eligible for. Now, immigration right away, when actually not soon enough, but I think it was in March, USCIS did announce that this public charge rule wouldn't apply to COVID-19 related care. So formally speaking, immigrants should not feel any of the concerns about public charge have anything to do with getting care for coronavirus. But, that's a very complex message to get across to people. And it's just a very difficult time for the immigrant community in terms of access to healthcare even before this hit. There were two other things I was going to hit on, but maybe I'll pause there so that Rigo can chime in.
Certainly, and adding to what Nina was describing, the messaging, I think, to our immigrant communities has been one of rejection over the last few years. And you're totally right, Nina. The anxiety in our communities was so high already, and certainly the level of trust in government in general, because for immigrants and for most folks, government is government. The message comes from the federal, state, local. They're going to see it as a one messaging, and they'll react accordingly. So the county has been doing a lot of work. I think, I'm representing the county, so I think it is the best place to be if you are an immigrant today. From the very beginning, the county made immigration a top priority, which meant directing all the county departments to support immigrants with the services we have. In particular, in terms of health, in the county, there shouldn't be any person who doesn't get the medical help they need, either through Medi-Cal up to 26 years old. That's the state coverage, regardless of immigration status. And then for those older than 26, My Health LA, which is county funded, provides that's level of health care. And you were totally right. I mean, the government, the federal government, made clear, at least for once, that receiving treatment, receiving prevention testing for coronavirus is not going to be counted against the public charge test. And we also have to remind immigrants in terms of the public charge, there's been so much discussion. The county, our office with the Office of County Counsel, through a directive by the Board of Supervisors, we trained more than 12,000 county employees in small groups to understand public charge and to understand how to respond to concerns our clients have. And the directive basically is that if anyone is concerned, to have them referred to our office for more counseling. But at the end of the day, the number of immigrants that are impacted by public charge is much smaller than the overall immigrant population in the county. We have 3.5 million immigrants in the county out of the 10 million total. So 1 out of every 3 immigrants in the county was born outside the country. But out of those 3.5 million, half are naturalized citizens. So they are part of this mixed families, right? Where you have citizens, you have the kids who were born here, and so on. At the end of the day, only about a quarter, about 907,000 to 1 million people are undocumented who would like to legalize their status. How are they going to be impacted? So my point is that the messaging, once you start looking at the specifics, the level of fear immigrants should have is a lot lower than what is portrayed out in the media and certainly messaging coming from Washington. And people should not stay away from receiving the services they need. And if they have any questions, the county has set up services like our office to answer those. So really, to be clear and to encourage immigrants to come forward. For instance, I mentioned with testing, treatment, prevention, care for coronavirus, that's not going to be impacted. And then we move into, the situation with workers. The immigrant, workforce is being impacted twice. I mean, I think, like you mentioned, Nina, disproportionate percentage of immigrants are still doing those jobs in those industries that are considered essential. And I mean, certainly exposing themselves to this crisis. And at the same time, those who were laid off, if you're an undocumented immigrant, there's very little support available. You don't even qualify for unemployment, which is that safety net, right? Undocumented immigrants are not qualifying for the money coming from Washington. So, what are some of the services? And I like to emphasize what they qualify for as opposed to what they don't. And so, particularly for workers, they qualify for workers' compensation. The commissioner, the insurance commissioner came out last week or the week before reminding everyone that workers' compensation is not impacted by immigration status. We also know that disability insurance, it's another benefit that immigration status does not prevent a person from applying. And lastly, we have the paid family leave that is also another benefit available. Unemployment, unfortunately, is not, But we have set up this center specifically to answer questions from individuals, families regarding this emergency. And I like to give the number. So this is this Health Disaster Center. It's an effort by a number of county departments. Our department is sort of leading the effort. The number is it's 800, actually it's 1-833-238-4450. 833-238-4450. We have a number of staffers in many different languages. We answer questions about workers' rights, employer, small businesses assistance, tenant rights, and we're adding foreclosure prevention services, because we're now beginning to see that homeowners are heading in that direction. And I just wanted to say quickly about the tenants. The county has taken several actions to protect tenants, including enhancing some of what's in place on Tuesday. For instance, now countywide, not just in the unincorporated areas of the county, if a city has its own protections already, then those apply. But if a city did not have protections, or the unincorporated areas, for instance, a landlord is prohibited from evicting a tenant because the tenant is unable to pay rent. And the standard to prove that you're impacted is a self statement by the tenant simply saying, I can't pay rent. And then that automatically gives the person the right to not get evicted. It is true that it doesn't waive the rent, so the tenant eventually has to pay it. But on Tuesday, the board extended from 6 months to 12 months the time the tenant is going to have to repay any back rent after the emergency is lifted. So the protection applies retroactively from March 4th to May 31st, that they cannot evict the tenant. And then unless it gets extended, the tenant is going to have after May 31st, 12 months to come up with the back due rent. So, I mean, that's just a huge protection that many other counties don't have, right? That is something that we put in place. And the specifics, if anyone has questions, if anyone wants to file complaints, because we know that some of the landlords are not following the rule, we have this assistance center where people can call. So, I mean, I think really to remind our communities, yeah, we understand it's a time where people are very afraid, the complications with immigration status, and then the lack of resources because of the immigration status. But there are some really good things, some really good assistance, and we want them to know that the county is here to help. The county is not here to enforce immigration rules or any of that sort. So we want them to trust, what we're saying, reach out and see what we can do to help.
Great. Thank you both for that great amount of information. We're seeing a lot of questions from the attendees asking for the phone number, Rigo, that you gave. So in case you missed it, we did put it in the chat, as well as the website address for Rigo's Office of Immigrant Affairs, where you can get more information about everything that he just discussed. I want to sort of narrow our focus a bit and think about how a lot of what we've discussed impacts children. Certainly many of the kids that are being impacted by COVID may have immigrant parents, but themselves not be immigrants, or they may be part of a mixed status family, the children themselves may be immigrants, and so forth. And so I want to ask both of you for your insight on how things like the workplace issues, the healthcare access issues, the housing issues, particularly impact kids, and what we can be thinking about with respect to solutions, policy, protection, advocacy, and so forth, to really be stepping forward for our kids during this time, and all children who are impacted by COVID-19.
Yeah, well, I think that it really just brings home the thing we've known all along about mixed status families, which is that, you know, anything that you're doing to undocumented immigrants is going to affect many, many more people, including US citizen children, because of mixed status families. And I think a great example of that is what Rigo was just talking about with the, you know, I mean, I think that we couldn't live in, like you said, a better county in terms of all of the messaging out there around access, you know, public charge, access to healthcare. And yet I can say that even in the school where I work, there are many parents who were not seeking out even benefits for US citizen kids that they could get because of fears about public charge. And, you know, I think we're going to just keep seeing variations of that now with all of the coming challenges that are going to face families and immigrant families in particular with the pandemic. So I think, you know, one thing is just trying to continually get the message across that families shouldn't be scared of accessing the resources that they need, that, you know, here in LA, there is actually a lot out there that is without regard to immigration status. You know, I think it's really challenging right now for schools trying to even communicate with immigrant families because of the digital divide and the challenges of just, you know, technology access for many low-income families. But I think that's a particular challenge for immigrant families and English language learners getting access to educational resources. So I think all of those things are definitely going to be challenges. I wanted to just highlight a couple others that might not be on your radar screen as much. One is the particular issue of DACA, and, you know, this is a litigation that's at the Supreme Court about the fate of DACA, and I thought it would just be of interest to highlight the particular impact that if the court decides on DACA in June to terminate the program, what that would mean for healthcare workers. So there was an interesting brief just filed a couple weeks ago that I think has over 27,000 of our healthcare workers are DACA recipients. And so it's just yet another illustration of, you know, the impact that terminating DACA in June, if the Supreme Court decides that case, would have. So I think that's something that advocates are trying to bring to the court's attention. The litigators filed a brief. There's been advocacy around that. That's one particular area where young people will be impacted. The other one that I just wanted to highlight, there's a lot more to say about this, but everything happening right now to unaccompanied minors at the border and in detention is extremely concerning. And so, you know, while there are many challenges facing immigrant households here in the community, there's also a whole, you know, population of immigrants that are either being summarily expelled right now at the border, including children. So there was just a letter sent that has, I think the number is 11,000 people were just summarily expelled in the last just 3 weeks. That means that these are people who are seeking asylum, including unaccompanied children. So children coming here on their own who are not getting any of the process that asylum seekers are required to receive under the law, but instead are being, nobody even really knows. There is no process here. They're being dumped into Mexico. They're being sent back to their countries. It's a shocking abuse of power right now that's impacting children as well as adult asylum seekers. So I just wanted to flag that. It's a real concern, and particularly for children, because there are high numbers of children, fleeing Central America still, and specific laws to protect them that aren't being enforced right now. And then there are the children that are here in the country who are in removal proceedings, and I can talk more about how some of those cases are playing out after we hear from Rigo.
Thank you, Nina. Rigo, I'm wondering if you, in part of your answer, if you can really hone in on some of the additional protections that DCFS also offers for immigrant children that may be part of the system, and how those services can reach them in addition to the broader group of children that may be in need of services at this time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Taylor. So 60%, nearly 60% of all kids born in LA County today, at least one parent is an immigrant. So you can see the impact that any policy and any lack of resources has on these kids who live in these mixed status families. I think what is crucial is effective outreach and education that takes into account not just the language. I mean, Google can translate, but is really the cultural and the immigration sensitivity of what's happening in these communities. We have to run this messaging through the immigration lens in order to be effective. And the first thing that experts would tell us is those delivering the message have to be trusted messengers in this community. Certainly, government today is not the most trusted source. So engaging, Taylor, like this type of discussions, institutions that are seen as neutral in how they convey valuable information. The faith-based community, for instance, they play a huge role. The schools, the school district, the kids can bring messaging to the parents. And another huge messenger, certainly is the ethnic media. They bring information into the living rooms every night. If my grandmother listens to Telemundo and she hears a reporter say something, and I go and visit her, and what I tell her is not what the reporter said, she will not believe a word of what I said. She will believe what the reporter mentioned. And so we're doing these daily briefings for ethnic media here at the county to pick up topics that are priority, if it's helping the tenants, if it's helping the workers, whatever is a priority, we cover that week. Like today, for instance, at 2:30, we will be talking about services that county has for seniors, immigrant seniors, that are not connecting. But getting back to the question, with this separated or unaccompanied children, as we know, the ones that are not being sent back, as you were mentioning, Nina, they're kept in these shelters that are run, or the space is leased by the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And when these kids are released from the shelters, it's very sad that their parents may not have the resources to take care of them. They may not have the access to legal representation, which they need. And so one program that the Department of Children and Family Services has is when they come in contact with a minor who is an immigrant and needs has no place to go, they will take the kid in, and they provide wraparound services. One of the things they have is a contract with Bed-Cetic Legal Services to provide legal representation for these kids. The fact that these kids are out there with no one to look after them, it's abuse. The situation they're in qualifies them for the special immigrant status that if an attorney that follows up and does the right thing, there's a good chance they're going to be able to get their immigration status fixed. That is one service that DCFS has. Another thing we're doing is working with Immigrant Defenders, which is a legal aid organization that provides legal representation for these kids in these shelters run by the Office of Refugee Resettlement. We're working with them so they can tell us about every kid who is in the shelter, who's going to be released, and tell us what needs the kid and the family have so that we can match them with the services the county has. Again, you mentioned, Nina, earlier, mental health, for instance. The Department of Mental Health has services for the kid and the family. I mean, I can't imagine, especially now, with being confined, to the home, where the parents don't have the tools, where the stress is so high. Many times these parents they haven't seen the kids for years. They left them behind because they had no other choice. And now suddenly they find themselves having to deal with that situation. Issues will come up, right? If professional help isn't available, they're going to have a really hard time getting through this. So this messaging, again, that we're putting out through our daily, weekly press briefings, doing all these, seminars, webinars, and things, really, again, trying to make sure that this information is culturally, that is immigration sensitive, because, think about us going and telling the parents, you need mental health. Many immigrants think that getting mental health means they're crazy. My grandmother will probably slap me if I tell her that she needs to see a psychiatrist, right? How do we message that so that it doesn't come across that way? For our regular population, we would say, hey, we got mental health services. Come on, set up an appointment. People sometimes are proud that I have my own psychologist, right? Not so for many immigrants. So that's the challenge. Taylor, when I hear that a mom didn't show up to the appointment for her baby at one of our clinics and didn't even call because she was so afraid, she just decided to disengage. What do we need to do to make sure that that's not happening?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Rico, and thank you, Nina. We have a couple of questions that have been coming in, and I think they're relevant to the topics that both of you have mentioned. So I'm going to interject with those now. We have callers and participants on this webinar from all over the country right now. I think I even saw folks from Canada joining us. So I know Rigo's Office of Immigrant Affairs is based here in LA County. Rigo, would you suggest that folks turn to your website for resources from out of state, or are there other places that they should be going for similar resources?
Absolutely. When the Board of Supervisors set up our office, the direction was very specific, very clear, to ensure that the rights of immigrants are protected, and that we promote their well-being. And this is immigrants and their families, right? So I always say that if immigrants have only one bar left on their phone, I mean, it used to be that you had one quarter left, right, for the payphone. If they call our office, we make sure that we either get them to the service they need, or we provide them the service in-house. For people in other counties, I mean, we don't ask them where they live, right? So certainly we get a lot of calls from Riverside, San Bernardino. All they say, hey, can you connect us to the Office of Immigrant Affairs out here? We just want to have our local place. Well, there's no such thing. The county, again, LA County has taken it upon itself. Our leaders, including the county department heads, to have the services available. So yeah, the short answer is yes, please, go to our website, give us a call. My phone number, Taylor, you have it, you can pass it on. If someone wants to, see if we can help them with some of the lessons learned, definitely, by all means, the more the merrier, right? We have this ongoing conference, calls with various immigrant affairs offices to share information, and sometimes just to commiserate, that we just don't feel like we have enough resources, but working together, we can make a greater impact.
Great. Thank you, Rico. And Nina, RFK, your school where you have your immigration clinic, is part of LAUSD and part of the UCLA community schools. I'm sure families there have access to a lot of information about immigration issues, but even then it can be difficult to get everything that you need to know. Some of the questions that we're seeing in the chat are from teachers in particular, wondering how they can share information with their families and share information with their kids at perhaps the grab and go lunch pickup, or via their online classrooms that they're teaching in every day. So do you have any suggestions for teachers, for educators, on how we can partner and work together with them to help families get information that you may have or that Rigo may have?
Yeah, I mean, I am happy to share. I will share the number for our clinic, and we have been giving that out at the grab and go spot at RFK, and we actually have hosted a couple Zoom calls for families, and we're doing some professional development for teachers. I think we all are just like doing what we can to do this remotely. It's definitely, it's not ideal because of the concerns about access to technology, but I think it's what we have. And the wonderful thing is that a lot of schools have been able to give all students a laptop or some sort of technology. And so we actually were surprised that on the first of these Zoom calls we had for immigrant families, that was about unemployment and access to how to deal with job losses. We had an attorney from that partner with us on the call, and we had a really good turnout of immigrant families. So I wouldn't write off that Zoom can be an effective option. I also just really commend the teachers that are going the extra mile to try to connect individually, reach out to students, because I do think that there's going to be a big range of how easy it is for people to join big group calls, but to the extent we can try to, I've certainly in our clinic, we've been reaching out to our clients to check in with them, and we hope that family by family we can try to connect with people. So those are some thoughts.
Great, thank you. And Rigo, briefly, can you mention if your OIA resources are available to teachers, and if so, how they can locate them?
Oh, absolutely. Our information is all on the website, and definitely they can reach us there. One thing we're doing specifically through this community school initiative, the LACO, the LA County Office of Education launched. We have been working with the various school districts that LACO works with. And there was a survey that was given to each of the schools, school districts, about their needs. And many of them said, the immigrant assistance situation. So next week, I believe, or the week after, I'm doing a presentation for all the school districts to tell them, what we are seeing, what resources are available, and how they can connect with us. We hope that doing this sort of train the trainer, will increase the bandwidth because schools are a very trusted messenger in our community. And we know, some districts where 80–90% of the students are immigrant or the parents are immigrants. So the more we can connect with teachers, the more we can connect with the school administrators, so that eventually the information gets to the families. That is a terrific partnership to have.
Great. Thank you so much. Nina, you mentioned your workshops that you provided to your families. I think what we may do is follow up and just hear more about what those workshops look like, and think about how we might partner to try to push that out even more. Sounds like you've pushed it out a lot, but I'm wondering if we can be supportive in assisting with that. Just because, again, I think a lot of our folks on today are teachers and asking questions about reaching their families. So thank you for sharing that as a resource. And again, we've shared Nina's clinic in the chat, and we've also shared Rigo's website in the chat, and we will follow up with that information as well via email so that folks joining today can access it. Wanted to touch on another question. If you don't have up-to-date information on it, just because it's a rather new announcement, let us know. But we've heard Governor Newsom in the last couple of days announcing significant investments, not only in addressing the overall crisis around COVID-19, but $42 million directed at kids in foster care and their needs. Today announcing that funds will be available to immigrant families, specifically in California, as a part of a California version of like a stimulus package. Wondering if you can both touch on that and its availability to California and specifically LA County folks, and how that can help kids and families in this time.
I'll mostly let Rigo take this one. I mean, I think it's terrific, just great. I recently moved to California from over a decade in Arizona, and I'm just reveling in living in the state. It's wonderful to see this kind of response at both the county and the state level. And I think it is necessary because there is this major gap that the federal stimulus package did not include undocumented families, and there are many, many ways that they're left out. So they still would not have access to a lot of the kinds of safety net programs that citizens will be able to access in the coming economic downturn that we're facing. So I think that it's a great step. I don't think it's going to be enough because the needs are going to be really great, and there's just so many ways that immigrant families are not able to access the safety net that the rest of us have.
Thank you. Rigo?
So, yeah, the details are still pretty sketchy as to one, how this money is going to eventually be in the hands of the immigrant families, right? Which is certainly our concern. And as Nina mentioned, the gap that exists, you know, in terms of the federal assistance, which is terrific for those who are already getting those checks. You know, certainly it's very sad that a lot of our immigrant families didn't get that support. We have our legislative affairs people in Sacramento already asking more questions about how this is going to be processed, whether we can have a chance to review some of what the plan is. Again, making sure that that immigration lens is applied to whatever has been allocated for immigrant families. I mean, we don't want to end up in a situation where it's too cumbersome or too, that it discourages families from getting the help they need. So we hope to have a pretty good understanding of this in the next day or two. We will be posting on our website a fact sheet, a Q&A type of information that we will continue to update as more information comes out. What the governor basically said is that in the next 30 days or so, they'll have these resources available, and that a portion of that money will be available to immigrant families, irrespective of their immigration status, which clearly is very encouraging. Now we need to see what the details are. And our understanding is that it may be distributed to some of the community nonprofit organizations that already receive money for some other funding for immigrants, including, for instance, the immigration legal representation that comes through the Department of Social Services. We're just trying to, again, figure out the details, and we'll have them posted pretty soon, very early next week.
Hey, I did want to just add one more thing, which is one real priority at the local level, I think, is continued support for the LA Justice Fund, the fund that Rigo referenced, the fact that his office is able to connect young people with attorneys for their immigration cases. And we didn't really have time to get into the total disaster that the immigration court system, it's always been, but it's gone off the rails with coronavirus. I mean, it has been by far the most dysfunctional of any court system in responding. We've seen just shocking things happening in the immigration court system. I mean, everything from attorneys are being told that they need to come with their own protective gear. We're having judges and ICE attorneys actually banding together with immigration attorneys and saying they won't do this anymore. They won't show up to court because it's so unsafe. So it is just an incredibly difficult court system. And without attorneys, immigrants have to navigate it by themselves. And so in the coming months and foreseeable future, it's just going to be so essential for immigrants to have attorneys to help them with what was already dysfunctional is going to be even more of a mess. Hearings right now are being postponed. There's total confusion about whether people have to go to court or not. There's a lot of ways that everything happening in the last 4 weeks or so, when the court system just so massively mishandled things, is going to have long-term effects for so many immigrants who are in proceedings. So I just want to flag that as an area that's going to be of great need.
Thank you so much, Nina, for mentioning that. We do have about 5 minutes left, and what I'm hoping that we can end on is really any suggestions that you have. We have, again, we have school systems on the line, we have university professors on the line, we have students, we have a wide range, families, caregivers, folks that are attending today. Any suggestions for policy recommendations or ways that systems such as a university or such as a school district can be helpful during this time, specifically for our immigrant children and families, understanding that they face unique vulnerabilities that others just simply do not.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that I feel like one role that we all have in a research university and as people who have access to information and technology is really to raise up the communities that aren't easily seen, that are being so severely impacted and harmed. And so, you know, I mentioned what's happening at the border. That's a really invisible human rights tragedy. Another is immigration detention, which we haven't talked about, but you know, it's incarceration in general in this country. It's brought to light the severe health concerns of many of these facilities, and it's all the more so in immigration detention and all the more so with coronavirus. So that's another community. I think that we all need to keep on raising up stories of the ways that people are impacted. And I think one of the really moving things about coronavirus is that it makes it all so clear that it's all interconnected. So it's in all of our interest to make sure that, you know, there isn't a massive outbreak in an immigration detention facility, because there's people that work there that are going to shop at your grocery store. And it's in all of our interests that, you know, people, well, I could go on. It's clear that it brings to light those connections. And so we really need to insist that the communities most harmed are recognized and helped in this time.
Yeah. Rigo.
So in time of crisis, we see the best and the worst come out of people. I mean, I'm just here in my complex. Immediately, a group was organized to do grocery shopping for seniors to prevent them from going to the store and getting exposed. Things that make a huge difference. But at the same time, you see all these, you know, hate crimes and blaming and going around, things that are just horrible. Messaging of the reality of what's really happening is very important. And I think academia can play a huge role in publishing data that is true, that is accurate, to portray how immigrants impact our livelihood. I mean, here in LA County, 33% of all residents, as I mentioned, are immigrants. They contribute a proportionate percentage to the county GDP, about 34%. When you see the contributions they make, you know, economically, just strictly economically, you know, never mind the social, the political, the cultural, and all those other areas, but someone has to tell the message, and message to really be impactful, it has to have data, you know, that is trusted. So you know, we're looking to this work with some professors, some research universities, to produce data that are you know, supportive of these families, so that we can message it out, and you know, not to lose an opportunity when you hear something that is you know, improper, even within our own families. Sometimes we have to address it, because what starts small, you know, can get much bigger. I can only imagine, as we start recovering, when employment is going to be so tight, when people are competing. I mean, you have 5 people competing for one job. What's going to happen to the immigrant person who also needs that job, right? Where are we going? And how can we, with you know, documentation and information, try to balance that outcome?
Thank you, Rigo, and thank you, Nina, for your feedback on that question. I think we ask because UCLA Pritzker Center is particularly interested in how we can support and partner with our county colleagues, our university colleagues across disciplines to address and provide that type of academic insight that can be helpful toward moving policy initiatives forward, particularly on behalf of vulnerable children and families that are at risk. And we thank you for elevating all that you have today, half of our immigrant kids and their parents and their families and their caregivers. We're really grateful for your expertise. For those of you who had questions that were not answered today, we will cull through them and work to provide suggestions and responses. And just wanted to flag for those of you who are interested, we also have a talk today at 4 p.m. with the Department of Children and Family Services and UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs on child protection and child abuse during COVID-19, and many ways connected to some of the topics that we've talked about today. So we hope you'll join us. You can find that information on our Twitter at UCLA Pritzker in terms of how to register. And with that, again, we thank you so much for being here. We thank our speakers. Let's give them a round of applause and thank them so much for their contributions and their advocacy on behalf of immigrant children and families. We appreciate you very much. Thank you all. Take care. And
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Rigo, thank you.
Thank you so much. This is terrific.
Always a joy to see you.
Likewise.
Rigo, let us know how we can be helpful to you with any type of support.
You know what? One thing I thought about, Taylor, right after closing, volunteers, interns from the law school, from the graduate school.
Great.
I'll reach out to you because I think we can use some really good folks to help
Let's do it.
answering phone calls, right? I mean, it's.
Do you have a need right now, Rigo, for that?
Say what?
Do you have a need for that right now?
Yes, we could definitely. And you know, it was a challenge for us because we didn't have office space. But now that we're all telecommuting, I think we can adjust it a lot more easily.
Great. I think that we might have some options that we can connect you with at the social work school. They have quite a few students in need of work opportunities right now. So we can look into that.
Let's then talk offline.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Rigo.
All right.
We appreciate you so much.
And likewise, thank you for all you do.
And thank you, Rigo. Great, great, great. All right, guys. Thank you so much to our students.